Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a video on getting started with GraphQL with Apollo Server. So basically what we're going to be focusing on is creating the backend piece. Okay, and then future videos we'll do some front-end stuff with this API. And just to kind of show how it works. So, what is GraphQL first? GraphQL is something that Facebook created. What it does, it offers several benefits versus the old school RESTful APIs. So back in the day, you would create a RESTful API, you still do, and what would happen is you'd have different endpoints. And if I were to send a GET request to a particular endpoint, it would send me a specific set of data with a specific information. I'd be able to add a query and stuff like that. You know, there was some flexibility, but I got back all the information, all the fields of my results. What if I only needed 2 fields? So it's just more information, which means more data has to transfer over, which means more time in the transfer. And then on top of it, if I needed data from like 2 different databases, chances are I need to make like 2 different tables in the same database. It would require 2 queries. So in that case, I would probably likely have to do 2 API calls, one to one endpoint that'll query one particular table, and one to another table, and then additional ones for information from other databases. So whenever you read GraphQL tutorials, they always use the example of like book and author, where basically first you do a query for a book, and then you see that the book has a author ID, and then so you know who the author is. So then you look up the author, but now you want to find all the books from the author. So now you have to then query all the books by that author. So you end up doing all these different individual API calls, and especially nowadays where we're moving towards serverless architecture, using things like AWS Lambda, where basically your API only runs when people actually make calls. So then you're charged for the number of events. And then, you know, there's also charges for like data transfer and stuff like that. So anything you can do to minimize what's being transferred and the amount of times that you need to make a call is going to end up making your application cheaper to scale. Even with today's cheaper, more modern scaling solutions, like the cloud solutions like Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Azure. And then on top of it, GraphQL really allows you to do some cool stuff that you couldn't do before. So if you've used like Mongo, like a NoSQL database, you realize there's no relationships. There's ways you can kind of mock a relationship, but GraphQL really allows you to kind of make relationships between anything. Whether it's static data, which is what we're going to do. We're going to code data right into our file just to kind of show you how it works. And you could actually do it between databases. So in like one GraphQL Apollo server I set up, I actually created relationships between stuff in an SQL database and a NoSQL database. Because GraphQL, what you're doing is you're defining what people can query, and then they just send that query to that endpoint. So there's only one URL, one endpoint. You send the query there, and the query looks a lot like sort of a JSON string with some caveats. And then there you go. You get your information back. You ask for the specific fields that you want, and it's great. Cool. So that was probably a fairly heady setup, but just to kind of give you an idea of what I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to recreate this file right here. So this is sort of the example I was talking about where I use a Postgres and a Mongo database. So we're not going to necessarily do the database part, but we are going to kind of walk through this. So what we're going to do is create a new folder somewhere. So new folder. We're going to practice Apollo because we're going to be using Apollo Server, which is one of many different libraries that allow you to create sort of a GraphQL library. There are other ones. There are things like Keystone.js, which is like a CMS that'll actually just do it for you in a sense. So essentially you'll create sort of, hey, I want these types of data, and then Keystone will just generate the API for you. So that's a cool thing too. Practice GraphQL. So there's a lot of cool stuff. Oh, wait, where did I call the folder? Yeah, I made a file, didn't I? Oh, well, let me take out that JS out of that folder name. That could cause issues later that I'd rather not have. Cool. So now we're going to go inside that folder. So let me open up my terminal. So we'll let the terminal open up, cd into practice GraphQL, and then we're going to do an npm init just so that we have our package JSON folder in there, or file. So npm init -y, so that way it skips all the questions. So it'll make that package JSON there. Oh, that's right, because I have some weird permission stuff going on, so I gotta do sudo. So sudo npm init -y the thing. And there we go. Okay, so it creates a file. So now in this folder I got my package JSON. I don't have any dependencies yet. We'll install them as we need them. So what we're going to do is create a new file, index.js. And we're just going to basically take this file. So first thing we're going to do is get all our dependencies set up. We're not going to need .env for this. We're not going to need Mongo for this. We're just going to need Apollo server at the moment. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to copy that over. Okay, require dependencies. And you're going to want to do this. So basically what you're doing is you're bringing in over the server, Apollo server, and you're bringing over GQL. Okay, GQL is going to be something that's going to be used. It's going to be a command for actually making the queries. So since we're doing that, let's save that. We need to actually bring in those dependencies in. So we're going to do sudo npm I, so that's I for install. We're going to need a Apollo server. Pretty sure it's Apollo -server. Let me just double check in my Apollo server. I'm pretty sure it's just Apollo server. Oh, yeah, it says right there, Apollo server. Okay. So let me get rid of those capitals. Apollo server, and then we're also going to want GraphQL. This is just GraphQL. So install those. So it'll do its thing. And while we do that, let's move on. So that's going to install and be in our package JSON. Let's go back to our index and see what else we're going to take, or our sample file. And what else we're going to take as far as our setup goes. Okay, we'll come back to defining resolvers. Okay, const log. Yep, those are all our resolvers. We'll come back to that. We're not connecting to a database. This is a thing I like to do, so I'll just take it anyways. What it does is just makes console log a little bit easier to type. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking this variable log and just putting in the console log function in there. So that way instead of having to type in console.log every single time, I just type in log. Okay, so that's, you can have that if you want. It doesn't matter. Okay, there's our schemas. We'll come back to that. Our resolvers. Yep, we'll come back to all of this. Here's what we need down here. This is the actual initiation of the server. So you want that at the bottom. Okay, and we'll put a little comment saying Apollo server init. So let's walk through this. So what this is going to do is creates a server, a variable called server, which equals a new Apollo server, which is why we brought Apollo server in up here from the Apollo server library. And what you're doing is you're going to pass it an object that has two things: your type definitions and your resolvers. Okay, your type definitions are descriptions of the type of information that your Apollo server is dealing with. Okay, so like if you have a book, what does the book look like? Okay, I mean, what kind of information do you have? Resolvers are the things that tell GraphQL what to do when someone queries for that data. Okay, so if I'm requesting that data, what actually happens? Okay, am I pulling it from a database? Am I pulling it from an RSS feed possibly? Where am I getting this information from? Okay, so that's what this is. And then this next line actually kicks in the server, so the server starts listening. And then here we just have a port process.env.port because, you know, deploying on Heroku. But if that's not available, or 4000, okay, then .then. So basically, once it's actually listening, it'll actually take the URL that it's listening on and console log it to the screen. Okay, which theoretically I could just delete this console now since I did this, but I'll leave it alone. Okay, so technically with that, I could already kickstart the server. So your Apollo server is up and running, but it's going to be all complaining because there's no data. It doesn't have any types or anything like that. So we need to define some types. Cool. So let's go back over here. Let me go grab my type definitions. So essentially what you're going to want to do here is you need to create what's called a schema. And we're going to use this GQL command, which is the GQL command just really means like, hey, this is a GraphQL string. And we can use this GraphQL string to define our types. There's other ways to define your types if you just use like the strict GraphQL library. Like it's a little bit more involved. This actually Apollo Server makes this a lot easier. So I'm actually get rid of this for the most part. So first let's create some data. So data. Okay. Let's say we're gonna make an array of mice. So const mice. Okay. And mice is going to be an array of mice. Okay, and then each mice is going to have a name. So each element in the array will be an object. Name, mouse 1. I'm not going to get too creative here. Okay, it's going to have a tail size. Why not? Long. Well, that would have to be a string. Long. And an age. We'll say 2. Mice don't live very long. Okay. Cool. Well, let's just make a few mice. So I'll just do that. Okay, mouse 2, mouse 3, and this one's gonna be 1. This one will be 1.5. I should keep it 1. So I want to type it as an int. Save. Okay, so we have that data. So now we need to create a schema for that data, so that way we can query that data. Actually, I don't want to delete the query one yet. Okay. So we're going to say we're going to create a new type, and we're going to call it mice. Okay. Then we put the definition in an object, or pseudo object. This is kind of a weird GraphQL string. There's some differences between a JavaScript object versus a JSON. Syntax slightly different. Okie dokie. So let's see here. Mice, they had 3 fields, which included name, which was a string. We had, and again, you don't have to put commas here, name, tail size, which was also a string. Let me just double check, make sure that string is capitalized or lowercase. Yep, it's capitalized. Okay, tail size. Oh, you do put commas. You don't put commas between the types. That's the deal. Okay. Let me double check that before I commit to that. Yeah, that's right. And then age is an int. Cool. So now we have the type mice, but I can't query the type mice because the queries that a user can send in are all have to be defined under query. So we have to define a query. We don't need this user query anymore. So we're going to say we're going to have a query for, we'll call it get mice. Okay. And basically what it's going to return is an array of mice. Cool. So we've defined our query. So we have our type, and then we have a query. So that way, because again, what the user can actually do is either define as a query, which means to get information, or a mutation, which means to add or modify information. So everything is either a query or a mutation. And in order to do a query or mutation, you need to have types, so that way it knows what data it's finding or mutating. Okie dokie. Cool. So we're on our way there. Just need one more piece, and then we can actually run the server. And we need to actually define our resolver. Okay, and that's what a resolver is basically. What is it going to happen when you do the thing? Okay. So there's a couple different ways of doing this. So let me just copy this part first. Resolver. So here we're defining our resolvers. put that, yeah, we'll put it right below. Okay, and basically what this is saying is that our resolvers equals an object. There's a query object that defines all the queries there, and the queries have to match. They're gonna match the name. Okay, so before it was user, but this is gonna end up being get mice now. Okay. And we don't have this user type anymore, so we don't need that. Okay, for the moment. And now so basically it defines a query. But the thing is that the way objects work in JavaScript is that if I just put a variable name like this, and I don't do the whole like key value name pair, it's assuming that I have a variable called getMice that has the value that I'm looking for. I don't have a variable called getMice. I've defined a type in my schema, but I need to actually define the resolver in a variable called getMice. Okay, and that's essentially what over here we're going to define the actual functions of resolvers. I'm just going to copy one. Okay, and I'm going to put that, it doesn't really matter where you put it, but I'll put it up here. Okay, and define resolver. So again, this one was called getMice. It's got to match our schema, or it's going to get all angry. Okay, so getMice. And I'm doing an asynchronous function. And basically what happens in a Apollo server, there's always 4 arguments being passed to your queries, or to your resolvers in general. The parent. So the parent just means the values of any parent query. So probably not in this video, but we'll talk about it later. What happens is that sometimes you have your query is a child of another query. So in that case, you're actually able to pull the information from the parent query to enhance your query. So maybe what happens is that you're querying books after querying author. So basically I say, hey, I want to know who this author is, and then inside there's a list of his books. So what it does, it pulls the ID number of the author and then does a separate query for the books, all within one resolver. Any arguments you asked for? I didn't ask for any arguments. Okay, so if I did want arguments, I would have just put them in here. So I would have been like, well, not there. I would put them in here, getMice. Okay, so it would be like getMice and then arguments. But not doing that. Okay. Context is just sort of information that's always going to be available from other places. And then I can't remember what the 4th info one's for. But the thing is that you have to remember that there's always these 4 arguments. These 4. So it's always easier to just label them that, so that way you know they're there. Cool. So you have those 4 things that are going to be coming in. Probably most of the time, these are the 2 you're going to be caring about the most. Cool. And I'm going to get rid of all this. Don't need that. We're not looking for a username. All we want to do is get all the mice. So all I'm going to do is return mice. Done. Okay, because what is mice? It's an array of mice, and all these individual objects represent the schema. They follow that schema, so it should work. So now I save this, and we should be good to go to actually run the server. So we'll do node index.js. Oh, I gotta do sudo. Wait a second. Actually, I think there is something wrong there. Get mice. Oh, yeah. There we go. That would matter. Okay. Oh, assignments. Okay, now I think it's a pseudo thing. Okay, let's see here. No, type int. Did you mean int? Validation, line 1 line. Where did I put int? I think that's it. I think it's all got to be capitalized for GraphQL. So let's do that. Save. Thank you, errors that actually explain what is wrong. And there we go. See, so now the host is running. Now the cool thing about GraphQL is that the way the server works is it actually has this cool tool called GraphQL Playground. Oh, that's right. I accidentally hit the wrong button. Okay, let me run that server again. This should be, I'll just copy and paste this. Copy. Head over to here. Pop that in there. Okay, and then we get GraphQL Playground. Now, GraphQL Playground is kind of like this tool to help you like test your queries. That way you don't have to sit there and go build out a front end just to test them. Because it's also, I mean, you could test them in Postman. Postman has added features to do that. But it's just easier to use GraphQL Playground. It's built in for testing. Okay, so this is from like the last time I was using it, so we don't need that. And the cool thing is that when it looks in your server and sees like what you've defined in your, you can go to the doc. So it actually literally builds docs for you. So see, the only query we have is get mice. Okay, and what it tells you is, hey, get mice returns an array of mice, and this is what mice look like. Okay, so you can sit there and really kind of understand what that. So even if you're not the person who created this API, you can study the API by reading the docs, which is really cool. Now, since this is a query, I don't actually need to spell out query. I can just do this. Make an object, and then let's just get mice. So it'll autocomplete for you most of the time. Get mice, and then this is where it gets really powerful in the sense that usually if it was like a RESTful API, I would just hit the get mice. There'd be like a show endpoint, and it would just give me all the details of the mice. But what if I only want their age? I just type in age. So I'm saying, hey, run the get mice query. It's going to return me an array of mice, but only give me back the age. So don't send me the rest of the stuff. So now if I hit run, and see, it only gets me back the age of the mice. That's really cool. Okay, so there we go. We've set up an Apollo server already. I'm going to show you some of the other features in the next video, but I think we're at a good length for this video. Hopefully this gives you the early stages of kind of setting up a Apollo server. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.